is looking to fundamentally restructure the international trading system. And just yesterday, he announced a pause on what is called a global set of reciprocal tariffs for all countries but China.
For Elon Musk, the timing couldn't be worse. His company is now the first and biggest casualty of a trade war spiraling into chaos. So what happens when your top trading partner becomes your top threat? What happens when your clean energy empire depends on a foreign supply chain? And what happens when Canada decides it's done playing nice? What's happening? Elon Musk just got hit where it hurts the most: Canada's raw materials. For all of Tesla's innovation and global reach, the company's ability to produce cutting-edge electric vehicles still depends heavily on one thing. The US never expected its closest ally to strike first, but Canada didn't just flip a switch. It launched a full-scale economic ambush. With one targeted move, Canada sabotaged the entire North American auto supply chain. Assembly lines are stalling, thousands of jobs are on the line, and the electric vehicle revolution, Canada may have just crushed it before it ever reached mass adoption. Access to raw materials like nickel, lithium, and aluminum. And for years, a significant portion of those resources came from one place: Canada. With the stroke of a pen, Canada changed that. New tariffs and export restrictions on these essential materials sent a seismic shock through Tesla's entire operation. The gigafactories in Nevada and Texas didn't shut down overnight, but the warning signs were immediate. Suppliers began signaling price hikes. Logistics teams scrambled to secure alternative sources. And investors, they panicked. Tesla's stock began to fluctuate as markets absorbed the reality that its carefully built supply chain had just been compromised. The cost of battery production, already one of the most volatile expenses in the electric vehicle industry, began to climb rapidly. That left Tesla with two unappealing options: raise prices and risk losing market share, or absorb the costs and risk profitability. But it wasn't just a logistical nightmare, it was a political one too. Tesla had long been a symbol of American innovation, a private company helping push the world toward a cleaner, tech-driven future. Now that symbol had been dragged into the mud of international trade warfare. Canada's move wasn't just economic leverage, it was a reputational strike. It exposed the vulnerability of even the most celebrated US companies. It challenged the idea that Tesla could operate globally without geopolitical consequence. And worst of all, it triggered fears that if Canada could do this, what might other countries do next? The message to Tesla was clear: build here or bleed. If Elon Musk wants to avoid long-term damage, he may have no choice but to construct new infrastructure on Canadian soil, or risk losing access to the very materials that make his vehicles run. And that dilemma cuts deeper than just Tesla. It calls into question the entire American electric vehicle strategy. The EV frontline. What if climate policy became a weapon of trade? That's no longer a hypothetical. Canada is doing exactly that, using the language of climate action to cloak an all-out economic push for dominance in the electric vehicle market. At the heart of this strategy lies a bold proposal from Canada's New Democratic Party: a 100% tariff on Tesla vehicles. But they did not stop there. The NDP is also pushing for a $10,000 subsidy for every Canadian-made electric vehicle. Together, these two moves form a powerful 1-2 punch. Punish the foreign leader while elevating the domestic contender. This isn't protectionism in its old form. This is green nationalism, a fusion of environmental rhetoric and economic strategy that Canada is wielding with surgical precision. The message to voters: support climate goals and protect Canadian jobs in one move. The message to America: compete on our terms or don't compete at all. And it's working. Canadian firms, including Ford and General Motors subsidiaries operating north of the border, are gaining a competitive edge. Even Volkswagen is moving to open a battery plant in Ontario. With local production comes eligibility for local subsidies. And with that, a growing divide between the future of American-made EVs and their Canadian counterparts. Ironically, the Trump administration had made EV adoption a cornerstone of its climate agenda. Yet the trade war with Canada could derail that vision. If Tesla and other automakers can't keep prices competitive due to raw material costs and supply chain disruptions, consumers will hesitate. Mass EV adoption requires affordability, and affordability is disappearing. What was once a unified North American clean energy mission is now fracturing along nationalistic lines, and Canada is no longer content to be a partner. It wants to be a leader. But leadership in this space doesn't just mean more EV plants. It means reshaping the entire trade landscape, and that reshaping is tearing apart the foundation of the US-Canada auto industry. Collapse in motion. A single car might cross the border 5 or 6 times before it was finally assembled. Engines from Windsor, dashboards from Michigan, aluminum frames from Quebec. It was a seamless flow of parts and labor. Now, that system is breaking down. The moment Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs and material restrictions, the ripple effects began. Ford warned of production slowdowns. General Motors paused output at select facilities. Suppliers started laying off workers. What had been an invisible, highly efficient ecosystem suddenly started collapsing under the weight of new costs and logistical barriers. What makes this especially dangerous is that it's not a typical industry slowdown. This is structural. These factories weren't built to operate in a high-tariff environment. Their margins are razor-thin. Their operations depend on predictable, tariff-free trade. When that disappears, the entire business model becomes unsustainable, and the worst is likely yet to come. If raw material costs keep rising, if delays keep piling up, and if political leaders double down instead of de-escalating, entire plants may shut down. Layoffs won't be temporary, they'll be permanent. Entire communities built around auto manufacturing, from Ontario to Ohio, could be economically devastated. This isn't just about higher car prices or frustrated supply chain managers. It's about the death of a system, one that once defined North American prosperity. And as the collapse unfolds, it opens the door to something even more dangerous. Because while America and Canada tear each other apart, other nations are quietly stepping in to take their place. The blue-collar betrayal. In towns across the Midwest, places like Flint, Youngstown, and Janesville, there was hope. Hope that protectionist policies, led by President Donald Trump, would reignite American manufacturing. That after decades of plant closures, outsourcing, and offshoring, jobs would return. Families believed that tariffs on foreign goods would level the playing field and finally bring back the dignity of blue-collar work. But that dream is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Factories that were promised a second chance are now laying off workers. Entire shifts are being canceled. Union leaders are sounding the alarm as production costs spike and orders dry up. The reality on the ground is devastating. The very communities Trump vowed to protect are experiencing the exact opposite of what they were promised, and the pain is sharpest in the auto sector, where the supply chain's entanglement with Canada has made tariffs a loaded gun pointed directly at American jobs. General Motors has already begun slowing output at several plants. Ford is warning of job cuts at facilities heavily dependent on Canadian aluminum and electronic components. Stellantis has hinted at temporary shutdowns. And what's causing this? Not Chinese manipulation, not cheap Mexican labor. It's a trade war with America's closest ally, Canada, a country that, until recently, accounted for nearly 3/4 of North America's integrated auto parts supply chain. The blue-collar betrayal is not just economic, it's emotional. These are workers who took pride in building America's backbone. Now they are watching their jobs vanish again, this time because of a political chess match they never asked to be part of. And this isn't a temporary hit. These lost jobs are not coming back. Suppliers are fleeing. Investment is freezing. The foundation of American manufacturing is cracking at its core. But as plants darken and paychecks shrink, the political fallout is just beginning. And that's where the real panic begins. At the ballot box, Trump's tariff trap. When President Donald Trump launched his trade war strategy, it wasn't just about economics. It was about politics. It was about reclaiming the Rust Belt, flipping swing states, and building a new conservative coalition rooted in economic nationalism. And for a while, it worked. In 2016, and again in 2020, blue-collar workers rallied behind the message of America First. But now, with the 2024 election looming, that very strategy is backfiring, and fast. In Michigan, thousands of auto workers have seen hours slashed and shifts eliminated. In Pennsylvania, steel mills that were supposed to reopen are instead scaling back. In Wisconsin, small manufacturing hubs are closing down altogether, and voters are noticing. The anger that once energized Trump's base is curdling into resentment. They believed the tariffs would bring jobs. Instead, they brought layoffs, higher prices, and broken promises. Behind closed doors, Republican strategists are panicking. They're seeing poll numbers shift in counties that were once safe. And they're realizing that trade wars may fire up a rally crowd, but they devastate real communities. The economic pain is becoming political poison. Even within the party, fractures are widening. Pro-business conservatives are openly criticizing the administration's hardline stance, warning that continued escalation escalation could cost the party key governorships and congressional seats. Meanwhile, populist factions are doubling down, blaming Canada, China, and even domestic companies for the chaos. The result? A party at war with itself, right when unity is most needed. President Donald Trump, never one to back down from a fight, has signaled that more tariffs may be coming. But with job losses mounting and prices rising, the political risk is becoming harder to ignore, especially when rival candidates are already framing his policies as an economic disaster. But the backlash isn't just political, it's financial, and it's coming for every American behind the wheel. Because the next crisis, it's parked right in your driveway. Sticker shock. What used to be a proud moment for American families buying a new car is quickly becoming a financial nightmare. Prices have soared across the board. Whether you are eyeing a compact sedan or a heavy-duty truck, the sticker shock is immediate and punishing. And the reason behind this affordability crisis can be traced directly back to the unraveling of the US-Canada trade relationship. Steel tariffs, aluminum duties, and semiconductor shortages have combined into a perfect storm. Add in the retaliatory tariffs on automotive components, and suddenly, the cost of building a car in North America has surged by thousands of dollars. For consumers, that means one thing: they're being priced out of the market. Even used vehicles, once considered the fallback for budget-conscious buyers, are now selling at record highs. The average used car price has risen more than 40% in just 2 years. And it's not just the purchase price. Repair costs are exploding too. That fender bender? Expect to pay double. Need a new alternator or computer module? You might have to wait months and drain your savings to cover it. Automakers are struggling to balance production with demand. Some, like Ford and General Motors, are cutting back on lower-margin vehicles altogether, leaving consumers with fewer affordable choices. Meanwhile, luxury and premium vehicles dominate what's left on dealership lots. For the average middle-class family, this means hard decisions. Do they lease something out of their budget, keep an aging vehicle that's falling apart, or walk away from car ownership entirely? It's more than just an inconvenience. It's a lifestyle shift, mobility, independence, the freedom to drive to work or take your kids to school. These things are now under threat. And for Americans in rural or suburban communities, where public transportation is not an option, the consequences are life-altering. But this affordability crisis isn't isolated. It's part of a larger economic pattern, a pattern where every new policy seems to land like a punch to the gut. And it's only going to get worse in the next round. When every policy feels like a punch, forget theory, forget policy papers. The trade war between the United States and Canada is no longer an abstract issue. It's a daily, tangible burden for millions of families. The average American is now paying more for nearly everything: food, fuel, housing, electronics, and construction materials. And at the center of this economic squeeze, the tariffs. Appliances that once cost $800 are now over $1,000. Lumber and drywall have surged, making home renovations or new builds nearly impossible for the working class. Electronics, packed with components sourced from Canadian and foreign suppliers, are more expensive and harder to find. Families looking to upgrade their phones, laptops, or household essentials are being forced to wait or go without. Small businesses are especially vulnerable. Local hardware stores, appliance retailers, and auto repair shops are drowning under inflated wholesale costs. Margins are shrinking. Profits are vanishing. Some are closing. Others are raising prices just to survive, passing the pain down to customers already stretched thin. The result is an economic environment that feels less like capitalism and more like a slow-motion implosion. This wasn't supposed to happen. Tariffs were framed as a way to protect American enterprise. Instead, they're punishing the very people they were meant to help, and the psychological toll is just as dangerous as the financial one. Economic anxiety is surging, confidence is crumbling, and trust in leadership, on both sides of the aisle, is wearing thin. Americans are tired of being economic pawns. They're tired of policy experiments that ignore real-world consequences. And as this trade war drags on, one thing is becoming abundantly clear. This isn't a strategic negotiation anymore. It's a chaotic, destructive war with no exit strategy and no regard for the citizens caught in the crossfire. And just as America reels from the internal chaos, the rest of the world is starting to move in for the kill. Why American industry can't compete anymore? We used to build the world's economy. Now we can't build a truck without imports. That's not just a rhetorical jab. It's a reflection of the decaying skeleton of American manufacturing. The machinery that once powered cities like Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland has either been shipped overseas or left to rust in silence. What remains is a fragile ghost of an industrial empire, dependent on other nations to function. Decades of outsourcing have hollowed out America's core. It started subtly in the 1980s, when executives promised that moving manufacturing overseas would lower costs and increase profits. Those savings were never passed to workers, and the long-term damage was catastrophic. Factories shut down. Skilled labor was left without purpose. Communities that relied on manufacturing collapsed, but worst of all, the country lost its ability to produce the components it needs most. Today, if you want to build a car in the United States, you need parts from Mexico, wiring from China, lithium from Canada, and microchips from Taiwan. The average vehicle crosses the U.S. border multiple times before it's even finished. If any part of that supply chain falters, production halts. That's not a trade strategy. That's a gamble. And now, with tariffs tearing through U.S.-Canada relations and China no longer a reliable trade partner, the gamble is collapsing. American manufacturers are facing historic bottlenecks, and they have no domestic fallback. The United States has not invested in redundant capacity or vertical integration. It has no plan B. Worse still, the skilled labor pool has dried up. For decades, young Americans were steered away from trade schools and into white-collar education paths. Now there is a massive generational gap in mechanical and technical skills. Retirements are outpacing new entries into fields like machining, welding, and electrical systems. Even if the factories existed, we wouldn't have enough trained hands to run them. This isn't just an economic inconvenience. It's a national vulnerability. In a time of global instability, supply chain security is power. America surrendered that power, and now it is paying the price. But the industrial crisis isn't confined to steel and machines. It reaches into the soil itself, and that's where the real starvation begins. Trump's immigration crackdown starves America. What happens when no one is left to harvest your food? You don't have to imagine it. It's already happening. Across the country, crops are rotting in the fields. Dairy operations are shutting down, and meatpacking plants are operating with skeleton crews. The reason? A deliberate war on the very labor that keeps the agricultural heart of America beating. President Donald Trump's sweeping immigration crackdowns have triggered a slow-moving catastrophe in U.S. farming. For decades, American agriculture has relied on migrant labor, primarily from Mexico and Central America, to perform the backbreaking tasks that few Americans are willing to do. Planting, pruning, picking, milking, slaughtering. These jobs are physically punishing, poorly paid, and often seasonal. And yet, without them, the entire food system begins to fail. With mass deportations accelerating and work visa restrictions tightening, farms are finding it impossible to hire the workers they need. In places like California's Central Valley and Georgia's peach orchards, crops are being abandoned. In Wisconsin and Iowa, dairy farmers are downsizing or selling out entirely. In the Midwest and South, the meatpacking industry is resorting to desperate measures, including automation and importing temporary foreign workers at higher costs. The effects don't stop at the farm gate. As supply drops, prices rise. Grocery store shelves begin to look thinner. The cost of fresh produce, dairy, and meat has risen sharply over the past 2 years, not just because of inflation, but because there is less being grown and processed. Farmers are angry. Many of them supported Trump, believing his policies would protect their livelihoods. Now they are watching their fields go fallow and their barns go quiet. This is more than just irony. It's economic suicide. And it's not just about food. This labor vacuum is spreading to other essential sectors, and the pressure is building in every wallet. Shrinking paychecks, exploding costs. Groceries, rent, loans, gas, everything's up except your income. It's a sentence every American household feels, but few can explain. The term is inflation, but the experience is slow suffocation. Your paycheck buys less. Your credit card balance grows. Your financial future shrinks. Over the past 3 years, the United States has seen a relentless climb in the cost of living. Food is more expensive. Energy is more volatile. Housing has become a dream, not a right. But while prices have surged, wages have barely budged. Raises that once looked generous now feel laughable when rent jumps by hundreds of dollars, and insurance premiums skyrocket overnight. Credit card debt has passed $1 trillion for the first time in history. That number isn't abstract. It's a measure of desperation. Millions of families are using borrowed money to pay for groceries, gasoline, and medicine. With interest rates now at their highest levels since the early 2000s, that debt is becoming impossible to manage. Even savings accounts are shrinking. Inflation-adjusted incomes have declined for most working-class households. That means that even if your boss gave you a raise, your standard of living still dropped. You're working harder and falling further behind. And yet, corporations are posting record profits. How? By exploiting pricing power. Many companies are using inflation as an excuse to hike prices beyond what's necessary, squeezing every extra penny from families too financially stretched to say no. This is not just a momentary blip. This is a structural shift, an economy where basic necessities are luxuries and financial security is reserved for the top 10%. The result? A middle class in retreat. And that brings us to the most dangerous tipping point of all, the death of the middle class, a nation falling apart quietly. It's not just about jobs anymore, it's about survival. Across the United States, the middle class is disintegrating, not with a bang, but with a quiet, grinding erosion of stability, dignity, and hope. Home ownership, once the hallmark of the American dream, is increasingly out of reach. Mortgage rates have more than doubled in just 2 years. Starter homes are priced like mansions, and even those with decent incomes can't afford the down payments. Rent is no better. In many cities, even a modest one-bedroom apartment can eat up over half of a household's monthly income. Healthcare? Still unaffordable. College tuition? Up again. Childcare? Scarce and expensive. And now, with shrinking savings and rising debt, the middle class is one medical emergency or car repair away from financial disaster. But it's not just material. The emotional weight is heavier than ever. Anxiety is now a baseline. Parents are scared their kids won't do better than them. Retirees are returning to work. Young adults are stuck living with their parents, not by choice but by necessity. There is no longer a clear ladder to climb. Instead, people are working 2 jobs just to stand still. The economy tells them they're failing. In truth, the system is failing them. And that is where collapse begins. Not with riots in the streets, but with resignation in the home. A nation built on mobility and merit is becoming a place where class is destiny. That's not just tragic, it's dangerous. And while the middle class crumbles, outside forces are circling, ready to take advantage of America's self-inflicted collapse, China's golden opportunity. As the United States wages a bruising trade war with Canada, another player is quietly cleaning up the spoils, China. While Washington fights with its closest neighbor, Beijing has been busy doing what it does best, playing the long game. And this time its prize isn't just market share, it's control over the future of the global auto industry. China has wasted no time stepping into the vacuum left by America's increasingly erratic trade policies. With the United States slapping tariffs on Canadian exports and triggering retaliatory measures, Canada has started looking eastward for more reliable partners. In recent months, Chinese firms have aggressively courted Canadian companies that extract and refine critical minerals like lithium, nickel, cobalt, and graphite, materials that are essential to building electric vehicle batteries. These are the same resources that Tesla, General Motors, and Ford rely on to keep their electric dreams alive. Beijing has offered long-term purchase agreements, joint ventures, and infrastructure investments that the United States failed to match. Chinese-backed firms are setting up deals to lock down Canadian supply for the next decade, cementing their dominance in the electric vehicle supply chain. And Canada, tired of being treated as an expendable pawn by Washington, is listening. This isn't just about batteries or cars. It's about leverage. With every Canadian mineral China secures, it gains more control over the future of green technology. Beijing is using America's trade war as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to corner the market. And with American automakers scrambling for stable supply chains, China now holds a card that could cripple U.S. production without firing a shot. Just when Washington thought it could isolate Beijing with tariffs and alliances, it underestimated how quickly its own neighbors would shift allegiances. As Canada opens its economic doors to Chinese capital, the landscape of North American trade is being rewritten, and not by Washington. The great irony? America's protectionism handed its biggest rival the keys to the future. But China is not the only country reassessing its alliances. Nobody trusts America. Once seen as the cornerstone of global commerce, the United States is now viewed by many of its allies as a volatile partner and increasingly a threat to economic stability. Years of unpredictable tariffs, diplomatic tantrums, and economic nationalism have eroded the trust that once defined America's global relationships. Countries are no longer waiting for Washington to lead. They are building a world where they don't have to rely on it at all. Germany has shifted its focus towards strengthening trade ties within the European Union and with fast-growing Asian economies. France has publicly criticized U.S. protectionism, advocating instead for economic sovereignty from the instability of Washington's politics. Even the United Kingdom, despite its traditional loyalty, is looking to diversify its economic strategy in the post-Brexit era. In short, old friends are finding new partners. Trade deals that once would have included America as a central pillar are now being negotiated without it. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, a pact once intended to box out China, now features China lobbying for membership, while the United States remains absent. Latin American nations, frustrated with shifting U.S. trade rules and sanctions, are forging deeper ties with the European Union and China. Even African nations are pivoting toward new investment sources that come with fewer political strings attached. The reputation damage is real. When America signs a deal today, global leaders ask not whether the deal is good, but whether it will survive the next election cycle. Washington's trade promises are no longer ironclad. They're seen as optional, temporary, or transactional. That instability has consequences. Global manufacturers that once built entire supply chains around the predictability of U.S. markets are now hedging their bets. New factories are being planned in Southeast Asia. Investment once destined for Michigan or Ohio is being redirected to Vietnam, India, and Eastern Europe. Multinational corporations are quietly shifting their footprint away from a partner they no longer trust. And as the U.S. grows more isolated, it is also falling behind in the very industries it once pioneered. The EV throne is up for grabs. Not long ago, the United States led the world in electric vehicle innovation. Tesla was a symbol of American ingenuity, and Washington touted green technology as the cornerstone of a new industrial era. But now that crown is slipping, and fast. South Korea has surged forward with Hyundai and Kia delivering affordable, high-performance EVs with global appeal. Germany, through Volkswagen and BMW, has doubled down on electrification with massive investments and a laser focus on quality and scale. Even Vietnam has entered the scene with VinFast, a new EV automaker that is rapidly expanding into the U.S. market while benefiting from streamlined government support and clear trade strategy. Meanwhile, American policy has become a tangled web of conflicting goals. Tariffs meant to protect jobs have driven up the cost of raw materials. Trade wars have disrupted supply chains. Immigration crackdowns have created labor shortages in the very factories meant to build the next generation of vehicles. Federal subsidies for EVs are either too limited or politically targeted, depending on the administration. The result? An EV industry hobbled by inconsistency and chaos. Tesla's production is under threat due to Canadian mineral tariffs. Ford and General Motors face logistical bottlenecks and workforce constraints. American consumers are watching EV prices rise just as they were supposed to fall. In contrast, rival nations have built coherent, long-term strategies. South Korea and Germany are not just building cars, they're building ecosystems, battery plants, supplier networks, and domestic raw material access. They have national plans and stable international partnerships. The United States, once the front runner, is now bogged down by infighting and uncertainty. As the world races toward mass EV adoption, America's head start is vanishing, and as new players enter the arena with focused agendas and global alliances, the U.S. risks being left behind. A warning sign that this isn't just about autos anymore, because while America fights to hold on to the past, the rest of the world is already writing the future. A new global order, and the U.S. is not invited. The most alarming consequence of the U.S.-Canada trade war may not be the factory closures or the layoffs. It may be the realization that the world is moving on. Without the United States, a new global order is taking shape, and America's name is no longer at the top of the guest list. India, the world's most populous country, is rapidly becoming a major economic force. With its massive domestic market and growing high-tech sector, it is forming new alliances with Europe, the Gulf states, and even Canada. India is leveraging the chaos in North America to reposition itself as a stable, long-term trade partner, one that doesn't play political games with its economic commitments. The ASEAN bloc, nations like Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia are rising fast. These countries are seizing the manufacturing and supply chain opportunities that the U.S. is losing. They're building ports, investing in infrastructure, and welcoming international firms looking for stability. And crucially, they are forging regional trade agreements that exclude the United States entirely. Canada, once America's most loyal trading partner, is actively realigning its economy away from Washington, with new investments from Europe and Asia, and a growing focus on self-reliant energy and mineral strategies. Canada is signaling that it will not be a junior partner in a dysfunctional relationship. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, the country is pursuing a foreign policy that emphasizes economic sovereignty and diversified partnerships. What we are witnessing is not just the fallout of one trade war. It is a systemic shift. The world is reshuffling its alliances. New economic leaders are emerging. Multilateral institutions are adapting to reflect the new power balance. And the United States, through a mix of arrogance and strategic blindness, is becoming an outsider. This isn't some future threat. It's happening now. Supply chains are being redrawn. Investment is flowing elsewhere. Trade routes are rerouting. America is not being pushed out of the global economy. It is walking out the door. And if it does not find a way back in soon, it may find that the global economy has moved on without it. America's auto industry is crumbling, Tesla's in trouble, and the world is moving on without us. So who's really to blame? Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Canada, or the system itself? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want more hard-hitting breakdowns like this, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay tuned.